What do you think are some of the common myths and lies about narcissists that are floating around on the internet today?
I think one of the myths that I say all the time is that you can never win with narcissists, that they are confident, that they know more or they're smarter or, that sort of thing. That's a huge myth because they're literally the people who have the most shame, the most pain, the feel the most empty, and actually are in fear all the time. And who they respect the most are people who are authentically powerful and know who they are. And they're actually way more afraid of you than you are of them. So, I mean, I would say that that's one of the biggest myths about narcissism. Um, I think that there's others in the sense that, they always win. One of the things that I see all the time is that they always overplay their hand. They almost always end up self-destructing in some way. There's so much about their lives that doesn't work. And because they just can't see long term, they only usually think in terms of short term gain, and it ends up usually working against them, and they end up being their worst sabotagers. So they end up self-destructing.
In your experience, like what's the fastest way to spot a narcissist before somebody gets in too deep?
Yeah. I mean, they always want to move a relationship too quickly along.
Mm.
So, it always seems too good to be true. If somebody seems too good to be true and then they're rushing a relationship, and it happened to me in a business situation. So it wasn't just a personal, I mean, obviously I've certainly had personal relationships with narcissists too, but in one particular one, I had a business partnership with one, and it was almost like too good to be true at the beginning, and then rushing it along. Let's, I need to have my name on your company, because if I have my name on your company, then I will be able to help get better clients. It'll help my credibility, and I can introduce you to this person and this person and this person, these big promises. And, I would never go for that nowadays. But, at the time, I didn't even really want to do it then. But I was like, well, okay, I guess so, and I kind of ended up going along with it. And, in hindsight, I think, what the hell were you thinking, But this is what happens. They're
Yeah.
super charming at the beginning, and you're almost overpowered by it. You're almost intoxicated with how great they seem at the beginning.
Yeah. And I think it's tough for people, especially in the dating world. I can imagine when if they meet somebody and they have a lot in common with that person and they just really like click like super well, even though they can have that, I mean, they have that feeling that it's like too good to be true. Like in some cases, in many cases, like it's just a solid like connection and they're very compatible. You know what I mean? So I think like I do agree with you with the fact that like, yeah, if you're like dating somebody in like week 2, they're like, yeah, let's move in together like tomorrow, or I want to um get married like next month and blah blah blah. I mean, obviously that I think is one thing, but I think people then will equate having good compatibility and connection with somebody with like, oh, is this too good to be true? Because I think in many cases like people just click, it's just the way it is, right?
Sometimes they do, but what happens with a narcissist is they mirror you. They use mirror neurons, and so they're very good at kind of becoming the person that you want to see. They're like chameleon-like,
Right.
and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but what happens is if you start to express like, oh, this is moving too fast for me, or I'm not comfortable with getting married in Vegas next week, and we just met last week. They will instead of respecting your boundaries, they're going to say, "Oh, come on, like." But this is the best thing ever, and we're soulmates, and they really won't let you express any kind of doubt, because they're really looking to get you to that next level as quickly as
Right.
possible. Like a
Yeah.
normal, reasonable person might say, sure, let's slow down. No problem. Let's take it at your pace. Let me respect what you want also. But a narcissist isn't going to do that.
Yeah. And I think people love is a really tricky thing too, because I think there's like it's very complicated because it'll make you do things at times that are just sometimes insane, right? You're like in a relationship with somebody that is not the right fit. They treat you horribly. You know that they're like lying all the time. You know that they're not the right person for you. You know they're not treating you in the way you deserve, but yet you stay with them because of like love. Like this, it's so wild and it's fascinating to me. As somebody, um, as a human being that like has experienced like the feeling of love. That like, I think it's just wild to me that emotion can just take over your life completely and just put on these blinders, right, to things that we know. Like if you weren't in love with that person or you weren't in a relationship, you would step back and be like I would never tolerate somebody like lying to me all the time. Or I would never tolerate somebody like not showing up when they said they would. I would never tolerate somebody who yelled at me all the time or whatever the example is. Um, and so yeah, I think people need to be careful with that, like with how they enter relationships, while also understanding that not everyone is out to get you. And I think that's the narrative I see online is there's this strong emphasis on like toxicity in relationships and narcissism, and this is just from my own perspective, that I think it paints this idea in many ways that when you date somebody, there's a good chance that they're out to get you. Like the reason they're being kind is because they want something from you. Like the reason that they're showing interest is because they're gonna like turn on you like 2 months later. And I just think that that's like such a really weird spot to be in, because like most people like genuinely aren't like that. You know what I mean?
Sure. And I think that comes down to your own self healing and your own dealing. I always say that there's four people in a relationship, which is like the true, authentic soul selves that are meant to shine and be powerful in all things. And then there's the trauma selves. and if you bring your trauma self in and you let trauma do the talking, trauma is not going to pick a great person for you, and trauma is going to tell you all kinds of crap about yourself, because there's this committee of voices in there that's like, you're not good enough, you're not worthy, you can't trust people, all the things, right? And so that's why I think, doing your own personal self development is so key and critical, because when you become authentically powerful and truly know who you are, there aren't those vulnerabilities out there that narcissists can seize on, because they're very good at seizing on people's vulnerabilities and spotting when people have that need, for example, to heal other people and help other
Mm.
people without boundaries. And because they will take full advantage of that. And so what happens is they end up with people who have unhealed wounds of themselves, who think, oh, I can help this person. I can be everything for this person. I can heal this person. I can love this person enough. If I'm just good enough, if I just do enough, if I just say enough, if I just keep going, then this person's going to see how good I am. And of course it's never enough. And so
Right.
um, there's this back and forth, and part of the love feeling that I think people feel is that dopamine hit, because what happens with
Hmm.
narcissists is like, it's dopamine, cortisol, because it's love, hate, push, pull all the time. And if you look at studies that have been done on that, like Robert Sapolsky's study out of Stanford, where he actually did a study on monkeys, and what the monkeys were doing is, they push these buttons, they play this game or whatever. And if they did it and got a reward every single time, nothing happened to the dopamine levels in their brain. But if there was intermittent reward, if there was variability in it, like they didn't know when they were going to get the reward, the dopamine levels in their brain rose to the level of cocaine. Literally just the anticipation that they might get that reward. And so that's what happens with narcissists, because they're not just great at the beginning of a relationship. They are like over the moon. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. You're the most incredible person. I've never met anybody as smart as you, beautiful, kind, loving, amazing, sexy, handsome, whatever it is. And it's so hard not to be intoxicated by that. And so all the dopamine is going off in your brain, and then they suck it away as quickly as they give it. And so all of a sudden, once you're locked in, you become an albatross, you're needy. I can't reach out to you all the time. I never said I was going to pay that money back. Who are you talking about? You're remembering things wrong. And all of a sudden it's down. And then if you think, oh my God, I can't take this anymore, I'm out of here, then you start to leave, and then they pull you back in with, where are you going? We're meant to be together, and then the dopamine again. And that's what causes the trauma bond.
Right. Yeah, and then what ends up happening, I would imagine, is people who, don't understand what's going on. They don't have a high level of confidence. They'll end up just staying in this, and it'll get so bad that their own mental health will be so sacrificed that this person, I guess, just has them like on a string, and it's like they have like pure control over the entire situation. Because I've heard that like narcissists, they're like, their main thing is they need control like all the time in a relationship to thrive, right? And if they don't have control, they kind of, I guess, from what I've understood, they kind of squirm because they can't manipulate that person in the way that they would like to.
I think it's a
Yeah,
couple of different things. So the way I like to define it is they need diamond level supply and coal level supply. So diamond level supply is their image, how they look to the world, being fawned over, all of those kinds of things, right? The outer, what I call the outer things that people can see. Then there's coal level supply, which to me is the manipulation, the control, the smearing, whatever they need to do to manipulate and keep you under their thumb. And it could be through passive aggressiveness. It could be through it's that fear-based mentality instead of being an abundance mentality. So when you go to negotiate with them, threatening that source of supply that's more important, which is that diamond level supply, is the only way to get them to stop manipulating you. Stop. It's almost like the coal level supply to me is almost like the sadistic part of them, because they enjoy the process of manipulating.
yeah, and I think from what I've understood, I interviewed Dr. Les Carter. I think I was telling you, and I was asking him about, can you like survive a relationship with a narcissist? Like, can you actually be in one? And he gave me an interesting perspective, like that you actually probably could. You can in many ways. I mean, because I think, again, this is just my perspective, that it seems like narcissism is also a spectrum, and that we all have narcissistic tendencies, and obviously there's like the
100%.
full on diagnosed medically narcissist that I think people compare everybody who treats them bad to, right? In many, and just what I see online. And then I think there's just people that like are just happen to be insecure at times. There's people that just maybe just need more attention because maybe that was just an unhealthy coping mechanism for them, when they were young or when they were in college or whatever. And that if they have the awareness to be like, oh, like like I'm in a relationship right now. Like I shouldn't be like posting like a nude photo or whatever the example is, or I shouldn't be um like comparing, the way you are to somebody else or whatever, like these unhealthy tendencies that people say narcissists tend to do, that you can be like, oh, like if I just have good communication with this person, like essentially like Dr. Carter was like, if you don't give them a reason to like engage, like they'll stop. Like, do you think that's true? Like if you don't add fuel to the fire,
Oh,
like if a narcissist is looking
100%.
for a fight or an argument based
100%.
on like they're poking at, you know what I mean?
If
And you
you're
don't
not
give it
giving
to
them
them, they'll
supply,
stop.
yeah. If you're not giving them supply, then there's nothing there for them, including with their own children.
Right.
And I just want to speak to what you said about the spectrum and narcissism and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, what I learned in doing my research for my book, and I love Dr. Carter, by the way, Les Carter, and we've done a bunch of swaps, and he's great. Um, what I've learned is that um, it's it really relates back to trauma in childhood. And so what
Right.
happens with all of us is that we go when we're in stress, we go into fight or
Hmm.
flight, and then that's when hormones start to kick in, adrenaline, cortisol, that sort of thing, right? And we all know about the amygdala hijack and how it like literally what happens is it shuts down your prefrontal cortex. You're just in limbic brain all the time trying to deal with an attack, what your body thinks is an attack. And when that happens as children on a regular basis, though, it can actually cause damage to the limbic system part of the brain, and it actually causes arrested development. And so, what
Hmm.
happens when they become adults is when they get triggered by anything that they think is going to threaten their source of supply, whether it's an eye roll or a tone or you're either for me or against me. If you're against me, you're public enemy number one. Then that limbic system takes over again. And now you're only dealing with pure emotion. You're dealing with pure, raw 5-year old or 2-year old or whatever it is that they were. And that's why you can't negotiate or communicate with a narcissist in the same way that you can a rational, reasonable person. And so, yeah, it is totally a spectrum because a narcissistic personality disorder all the way at the end of the spectrum. But we all have an aspect of that. We all have an aspect of what are our triggers and when is our amygdala going to get hijacked and when are we going to end up, we all have an aspect of it. The difference is with a narcissist is that they have no ability to empathize with the other person and see their side or acknowledge them, or they just don't have that ability. So I always liken it to like having a toothache. If you have a toothache and you're like in so much pain, all you can do is see your own pain. You can't see anybody else. You can't feel anything about anybody. You can't hear what they're saying at that moment because you're just dealing with your own pain. So it's like that.
Yeah. And I look back to my own life, and I've shared this before. I used to have a very like I mean not a very I mean I would say I had an unhealthy relationship with external validation, which I would say like if you ask like a lot of the experts like yourself on narcissism, like what is like the easiest way to describe it? I think it's like they have an unhealthy relationship with external validation because they don't know who they are for themselves. They don't have their own internal thing going on, so they have to use the validation from other people and things in their life to like fill up their persona. And so I look back in my life and I'm like, I definitely did that for a few years in my 20s when I just was chasing after like women solely for validation, or just the way that how obsessive I was with my physique because I knew that people would compliment me if I looked a certain way. But I also I knew I could also empathize with people at the same time and have compassion while doing so. I mean, I understood my role in certain things. And so I share that because I don't want people to get the idea that, oh, just because this person needs extra validation that makes them a narcissist. It just could
Mm-mm.
be like, again, like an unhealthy coping mechanism. Um, that said, I mean, you have a lot of experience as an attorney, negotiation, etc. If somebody's in a relationship, or personal or professional, with somebody that, let's just say, they're difficult, maybe not, they're not necessarily a quote unquote narcissist, and they don't have like healthy conversation skills, like what do you think is the best way to communicate with somebody that may display some toxic um, traits that would lead to them not being able to communicate effectively?
Hmm. So good of a question. I mean, there's so many ways that I can answer this because it's not really just only one way. One of the ways that I suggest is, well, first of all, let me back up. The first thing you have
Yeah.
to do is what I call step one, don't run, because then you go to step two, make a
Hmm.
U-turn, step three, break free. So step one is you put this invisible shield down around you and you say, these are my boundaries, and start looking at the person as if they're a toddler having a tantrum on the floor. Because
Hmm.
at that point, you can start to take yourself out of it and depersonalize it. Because the more that you say, this person makes me feel whatever, then you're giving them your power. So the more you can start
Exactly.
to look at them as if they're a toddler having a tantrum on the floor. If a toddler's having a tantrum on the floor, you don't feel like you got to take it personally and get down on the floor with them and start screaming too. You would look at them and you would go, okay, you done yet? All right. Well, when you're done, I mean, you just kind of like that. And so what I tell people is put an invisible shield down around you. Then you're like Superman with the bullets off your chest, or Wonder Woman with the bullets off your bracelet, and start to observe their behavior, and then just say things like, I can see that you're upset. We can have this conversation when you've calmed down, or I'm not willing to participate in a conversation where I'm not being respected. We can resume this later. This approach is not working for me. Or you can just even, if they say something that's hurtful or whatever, you can just say, thank you for the feedback. You don't need to, I note that you said that. Okay. That doesn't mean I agree with you or I don't or whatever. I mean, so there's certain things that people can do like that. The other thing that I suggest is what I call fluff for favor, vomit later. And that's where you're kind of fluffing up their ego like you would fluff up a pillow. And you use it sparingly and strategically in a way to get what you want. You give them something that they want, and in order for you to get what you want. And so, you could say like, hey, can you do the QuickBooks this month? You're so much better at it than I am. You're so much smarter. You're much better at software, whatever it is. And it'll be done so much faster and more efficiently if you do it than if I do it. And they tend to be motivated, obviously, by that sort of thing. So that's
Yeah.
another way. I call it ethically manipulating the manipulator. So it kind of just depends what your situation is at the time, but those are a couple of things that people can do.
Yeah, I think if you like affirm what you stand for, what you believe, in a way that's polite, obviously, like you don't want to be like playing the game of attacking somebody or constantly pointing the finger. I mean, I think
Never
it'll.
attack.
I think
Never
I just think
attack.
no, and I just think generally, at least in my experience, people respect people who have boundaries. Like at the end of the day, like the fastest way to get anybody to lose respect for you is to not have any boundaries and just be somebody that just lets somebody like walk all over you. And I think people, for the sake of being liked by people, they kind of forget that, and they also think that boundaries have to be like this, like super like firm, like kind of thing. But really, like, boundary is just like, all right, well, where's the line in the sand that you draw that you're not you're not okay with something, whether it's personally or professionally,
Hmm.
and then how good are you at upholding that boundary, right? Because it's one
Right.
thing to like say it, but then like people are, and this is another thing I'd love for people to remember, is like we're all flawed. Like I am an imperfect person that is constantly like working on myself, or if I say something, I'll think back and should I have reframed it? And that like people are people, and we have to also give people some grace, and that people aren't going to change overnight, while also understanding that the only way for somebody to kind of change behavior is to hold somebody like accountable, right? Because they're not going to understand if they keep repeating something if you don't say anything. And so it's just this dance where you don't want to be attacking somebody or pointing the finger. You want to be, I guess, just reaffirming what you're okay with and what you're not okay with when it comes to personal and professional boundaries. And that, I think, is the only way to kind of command, I mean, not just respect, but just, I think, like a mutual understanding for each other when you're in a relationship, while also being mindful that, there's just certain times where you got to walk away from a situation. Like if you're like constantly having to like to share what, bugs you or what bothers you, like, I mean, eventually, like, time's going to be up and you're going to be like, all right, well, this isn't right for me. But a lot of times what happens is people just stay in it just for the sake of being in a partnership professionally or being in a romantic relationship. But I'm glad we're having this kind of open, nuanced discussion, because, part of, I guess, part of my, I guess, I don't know if it's passion, but part of my interest in diving deeper into the subject of narcissism is I do think that while it is important to identify what it actually is, I think it's now been like kind of this easy out for people if something doesn't work out for them romantically, to say, oh, he was a narcissist, she was a
Mhm.
narcissist,
Totally.
you're a narcissist. And I don't think it's that simple. Like, I think it takes away from the person's ability to take any kind of accountability and ownership for their actions. And B, it's just this, you're playing like pretend like doctor, and you're diagnosing people that you shouldn't be diagnosing. Um
Yeah, I mean,
so
I changed
right?
the name of my certification program to the High Conflict Negotiation Certification, uh, rather than narcissist, because if somebody has a high conflict personality, you're not necessarily diagnosing them. You're just saying, everything's an issue, everything is a problem, everything is difficult. They thrive on chaos, and you're not necessarily diagnosing the person. You're just saying that this is how they are. This is your experience of that person. And I do think you're right in the sense that, as a lawyer myself, I've seen it evolve. Years ago, people used to say, oh, she was crazy or he was controlling or whatever. They didn't use the word narcissist as this sort of catch all. But point that I want to make with it is that it really doesn't matter if a person is a diagnosed narcissist or they're not. If your experience of them
Right.
is that they're difficult, they're high conflict, you feel triggered, all of those things, and you don't feel like your emotional needs or your personal needs or your business needs or whatever it is are being met, because it's not a two-way communication. It's not something you feel heard in. You don't feel seen, heard, and understood. Then it doesn't matter. You just need the tools in order to interact with that person from a place of power, authentic power. I often say it's like
Right.
Glinda the Good Witch from Wizard of Oz. When the Wicked Witch came around her, she just went, "Go away, you have no power here." And the Wicked Witch, like, oh my
Yeah.
God, I'm staying away from her. It's because Glinda the Good Witch knew who she was. She wasn't, worried
Mhm.
and scared about that witch. She was just like flicking her away like she was a gnat flying around.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the way you handle situations like that, and you become powerful in a situation where, your power could, I guess, be easily taken away if you're not careful. So what is in your, I mean, I know you have a 4-step approach for dealing with, you know, toxic situations like this, but I guess from a general high conflict situation where you have two emotionally charged people, you have somebody, you have two people that are just not, they're butting heads, they're not getting along, emotions are high. what do you think is the best way to handle a high conflict situation while also maintaining your own sense of self-respect and dignity while doing so?
Hmm. Well, first thing is that invisible bubble, right? And making sure you start to
Yeah.
see them like that and observe. The other thing that you can do is look at ways that you can limit. So I tell people that they need to have one form of communication instead of 60, you know? So because they're going to try to,
Mhm.
the more you start to pull back, the more you start to take away that source of supply, because they're almost like drug addicts with needing supply like that. The more you pull
Totally.
back, they're going to get angry. They're going to have a tantrum, and they're always the worst right before they're ready to give up. So you just have to start to
Right.
say, okay, I'm going to have one form of communication. And I recommend that it be email because there's a time and date stamp and it's the least likely to be manipulated. And so if you want to think about, okay, maybe I might end up in court or maybe I might end up in a situation where I need to prove what was said or what wasn't said, then you want to just have a really good way to be documenting what was actually said and not said. And then, if you're in a divorce and you have kids, there's court approved parenting plan apps that you can use to communicate with each other. That's okay too. But I do recommend that you make sure that you're always confirming what was said. I just want to make sure that we understand this is what we talked about and this is what I'm confirming what was said. Um, because you want to have uh, documentation on all of that. The other thing that I recommend is starting to control the conversation in a way that they can't sandbag you. They can't. So I call it making a
Mhm.
plan, Stan. And the way that works is before you meet with them, let them know this is the agenda, this is the scope, these are the things we're going to talk about, these are the things that I'm willing to have a conversation about, and then also a time limit. So and make sure they know about it all ahead of time, so that you can say we're going to meet on Wednesday at 3 p.m. and these are the two things that we're going to discuss. And then when you get there, keep your focus on facts, not feelings. Respond, don't react, observe, don't absorb. Those are the things that I say often. You just, if they try to trigger you, SOS, which is stop, observe, then speak. Take a breath. Do not come from a place of emotion, because the minute that you do, they have you. They have you. Oh no, I'm sorry. We
Right.
we said that we were going to discuss this. So I'm going to ask that we continue to focus on this. And then at the end of the time limit, you can say, um, thank you. This has been great. I love talking to you. You're my favorite person, whatever you want to say. But I have a previous engagement, so I have a hard stop at 4 o'clock or whatever it is. So let's set another time. But this is you taking control of the conversation.
Right. And so, like, what happens if? Because a lot of times, I think people associate um narcissists and people who are quote unquote toxic with being like high conflict, and they're more like loud and argumentative and stuff, which I think you're just kind of describing. What happens if they just shut down and don't say anything? Because isn't that like another trait of somebody who's manipulative, is they kind of stonewall you?
Sure. I mean, most of the time they don't do that right when you're talking to them. I mean, most of the time when you're talking to them, what they'll do is try to hijack the conversation by things like, "Oh, why are you bringing that up now? Oh, you just interrupted me. Oh, now you're too loud. Why are you bringing this up when that I have so much stress going on?" Like they never really quite let you get to the point, because that's a way to
Hmm.
control the conversation, right? And if that happens, that's when you need to step back and go, you know what, this is not working for me today. This conversation's not working for me. But when you're ready to discuss the issues, I'm here and I'm open and I'm willing to do that. And just, you don't need to be in that conversation at that moment. And you don't need to be disrespectful. Be calm, be firm, be direct, but not emotional. Because as soon as you do, they go fishing, and they reel you in, and now you're like there. And so just, you always have a choice. It doesn't matter who you are, you have a choice. So, sometimes I tell people, if they get really angry or whatever, just get curious instead. Oh, I'm curious. What makes you think that? Oh, I'm curious. What makes you say that? Respond with curiosity instead of anger. That definitely helps too.
Right. Yeah. And do you think it's possible for somebody to actually survive a relationship with a narcissist? Like, do you think if you use these tactics you're talking about, you can actually help the relationship improve and actually grow together, and then kind of change how this person behaves?
I mean, if they're a true narcissist, all of the experts that I've spoken to have said that a true narcissist is not going to change. Because you have to be willing to do introspection. You have to be willing to look at your own flaws and say, you know what, I'm going to apply some personal development here, and I'm going to see that, I'm not perfect, and, until laid out there. And that's just something that a narcissist inherently doesn't do.
Mm-hmm.
So, can it work long term? Sure, it's worked long term for a lot of people. But what happens is the other person is completely absorbed into that narcissist, and they're not getting their needs met whatsoever. And they feel totally and utterly depleted and exhausted all the time.
Yeah. It's so true. And I think at some point you have to figure out what you actually want in the relationship. And I mean that by saying when is it time to step back and say, oh, am I actually getting what I need in this situation, or am I just settling for breadcrumbs? And I think the only way to really do that is to set time for yourself on a daily or weekly basis, or meet with a therapist to be able to discover this. Because if you're just constantly trying to think about this while you're in the relationship with somebody who's toxic and doesn't seem to care about you, you're going to constantly think it's you because they've convinced you of that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's what they're always going to do: project and deflect, lie and deny. That's what I say is, anytime you try to approach them with, they'll make your feelings wrong. So if you go to them and say, I feel hurt, then that becomes an issue, because that, to a narcissist, is making them wrong. They will take that personally.
Right.
And they don't know how to deal with that. So they're not going to respond with, oh no, I can't believe I hurt you. And another thing is, I always say I'm half Chinese, so I always wear jade, right? But never jade, never justify, argue, defend, or explain. Right. Because when you do that, you're hoping, you're expecting, you're thinking that this person might see your side or acknowledge you or whatever. And you have a better opportunity with the brick wall. They're not going to do it.
Right.
In fact, it's going to be worse for you.
Do you have any other tips or comments on how people can kind of outsmart a toxic person and take their power away?
Well, so my SLAY method is strategy, leverage, anticipate, and you. And you have to have a vision. What is it that you want for yourself in your life? Or that negotiation, or whatever it is that you're dealing with. Having that vision and having it be super specific and clear is so important. I know many times when you're dealing with a narcissist, you think, I just don't want them to be bothering me anymore. I just want them to stop, or but don't have your vision be in terms of anything with them. Have it be with what you want in your life. Do you want a loving relationship where it's back and forth and there's communication and you both feel heard. And, do you want that? Or what is it you want from the negotiation? I want my business back, or I want my house, or I want my kids, or whatever it is. And then number two is leverage. And, whether you're in a formal negotiation or you're just dealing with a family member or whatever, these principles still apply. Narcissists don't want to be exposed. That's their worst nightmare.
Right.
And so they're never going to let go of the coal level supply, which is manipulating you and seeing you squirm and making your life miserable, unless you threaten that other source of supply. That's the only way it works. And then because you want to cut off forms of supply. And then A is anticipate what they're going to do and be 2 steps ahead. And then Y is your power. You're 100% authentically knowing who you are, your mindset. I know I can win this. I know that I am better than this. I know that I'm meant for more. I know that I'm, all of those things. And really just keeping that focus on your vision and 100% knowing that you can get there because you can. That's the SLAY method, and it always works. I've trained more than 10,000 people through my SLAY programs. And just since I launched my coaching program last year, I've trained over 200 coaches. I mean, this is not, where I'm kind of like, oh, maybe this will work. This is just like, it definitely works. I have 50 million views on my YouTube channel. So, I know that it works. Millions of people. This is proven.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that people need to really gain a full understanding of themselves and be able to do the work on themselves so that they can fully understand what's the role that they're playing in their own life. Because once I think they understand that, they gain some level of autonomy and control and power over themselves. They'll easily be able to, not just detect BS, but to walk away from it when it's not suiting them well. One thing I'd love to cover before we close here in a couple minutes is, what's the best way to detect if somebody's lying to you? This is something that I'm fascinated by, body language. I've always been that way. And I can tell pretty quickly if somebody's lying to me, even if they don't realize it, just because you can just tell by the way somebody communicates, in my opinion. And so I've interviewed different people to talk about this because I'm just genuinely fascinated. And I think in people in general, I would say no one wants to be lied to, right? So what is, as somebody who's done a lot of negotiations, been in the courtroom, dealt with a lot of high conflict situations, what's the best way to tell if somebody's lying to you?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. Eye contact is one. How they touch their face is another one. The higher up on their face is but sometimes people can have an itch or something, but you can just see incongruent body language from what they're saying. If they're saying absolutely, like they're shaking their head no, but they're saying yes, that's incongruence in body language. Facing away from you, and it's just kind of saying things, but their body language is telling you that they're halfway out the door, that they're not listening, that they're saying a certain thing. That is another way of being able to tell. Just sweating a lot of times, how they're leaning in or leaning out is another one. Closed body language is another one. If you're really closed up, that's another one. Right. There's really, I have a body language course actually on how to negotiate with a narcissist through body language. And, it's 75% of how we communicate. So it's a fascinating course. It's one of my favorite ones, even though I don't really push it that much, but it's a really good one.
Yeah, so body language is a big thing.
Huge.
Change in tone. Um,
Tone is another huge
I interviewed,
thing.
and I think base having a baseline, like understanding somebody's baseline, I've heard is also really helpful. Like if you know somebody is like, I mean, just acts like one way, and all of a sudden they start to like act a completely different way. Like in front, I mean, I just heard that like certain things like that, like you can tell if somebody's not being truthful with you.
100%. 100%. I mean, I think the more you start to read people, the more you start to know how to look at somebody's body language with their tone, what they're saying, how their head is moving, how their eyes are contacting with you. Um, you can just tell. You can just tell.
Right. Anything else that we haven't covered that you think would be useful for the audience?
I have free phrases for disarming narcissists, which they can get at disarmthenarc.com. I started to give you some of them, but I think that that's something that a lot of people using phrases like "I agree with you." I agree with you that we're not on the same page. I agree with you that that's what you think. Because they hear "I agree with you," that helps. Another one is just short responses like, no, got it. Okay. I see. Something like that, where you're just sort of not giving them that supply source. That's another way of doing it. Another way is just saying, we can have this conversation later. I understand that you're upset, and I think it would be better for us to have this conversation when you've calmed down. Using phrases that are just, you keep it away from you. You keep that focus away from you and put it back on them. Mean, a lot of times what kind of disarms a narcissist too is phrasing or kind of parroting back to them what they've said. Oh, so just so I
Right.
can clarify, your position is X. And even if you said the exact same thing that they just said, they're going to say, no, that's not what I said. I mean, so
Right.
getting curious is another one. Okay. So tell me more. What were you saying then?
Are you familiar with Jefferson Fisher's work?
I am just a little bit, but yes, I know who he is.
Yeah, he said something very similar where he's like, if you're in a situation with somebody and they say something like that maybe offended you or was borderline hurtful, you're like, hey, what did you just say? Like, can you repeat that? And then you get them to like kind of think and speak out loud. And then
Exactly.
you like pause. You know what I mean? And it really gets them to like look at themselves in the mirror and say like, oh crap, like I can't believe I just said that.
Yeah.
Because yeah. But
Yes,
I mean,
exactly.
I think and I think I'm sure you can attest to this. Like I think all of this is just like it's like a learning curve for a lot of people, and that I think we've said throughout the conversation, like don't make assumptions about people's like mental health and assuming everyone is a narcissist. But I think that having like a better understanding of yourself and how to communicate with people and how to set boundaries and how to be assertive and maintain your own level of self-respect while also being respectful to that person. I think it's just going to, when you learn those skills, it's going to serve you no matter if you're in a relationship with a narcissist or not, or if you're in a high conflict situation at work or not. Like these are all, I think, going to make you like a better individual. Like I think self-awareness, in my opinion, is the new sexy. Like I think the more self-awareness you have over your own thoughts, behaviors, actions, how you carry yourself as a person, I just think the more of a better life you'll actually live, because you'll become aware of how you are impacting your relationships, your career, your own health, wellness, etc. And I think the only way to kind of improve as a person is to understand like what your starting point is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it really comes down to you knowing who you actually are, feeling completely secure in that. And when you do, a narcissist is just, first of all, you're not going to be a target for one, because
Mhm.
again, they look for those vulnerabilities. And second of all, if they do try anything, you'll be like, okay, whatever.
Yeah, like
Because
peace out, right? Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, Rebecca, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for coming back on the podcast. I really enjoyed this combo. Um, you mentioned a few things that you teach. If people want to learn more about your work, if they want to listen to your podcast, if they want to follow you on YouTube, where's the best place to do that?
Well, my website is rebeccazung.com. On there, I have all my courses. There's also a ton of free resources, like so many. The one I just mentioned to you, but there's also many others. And so, feel free to go check it out. I have a freebie on documentation, what to document, a freebie on how to get started negotiating. I mean, there's a ton. So I would just say my website is definitely the best place. YouTube is rebeccazung.tv. So you can go
Mhm.
there as well. And also, Instagram, of course. And those are definitely the best places to connect.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming back on the show. I think the audience is going to really enjoy this conversation.
Thank you. It's always a huge pleasure to talk to you.